the Grouchy Nerd.
Alright, quiet down, knuckleheads. It's time to take another look at a new hero pack for Fantasy Flight Games Marvel Champions. This time we're looking at Phoenix. No, the character Phoenix. Young mutant Jean Grey's telepathic abilities emerged during a time of trauma as she bore witness to the death of her best friend. Professor Charles Xavier, a fellow mutant and telepath, took Jean under his tutelage and helped her develop her psychic powers, training her to use telekinetic powers as well. Together they used Xavier's Cerebro, a mutant locating device, to find mutants and invite them to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, a school for mutants that also serves as a front for the X-Men, a heroic team of mutants. Jean was one of the first X-Men who, at the time, went by the name Marvel Girl. While palling around with Fantastic Four, Jean encountered the Phoenix Force, an ancient cosmic entity who later came to Jean's aid as she was nearly burned alive by a solar flare. The Phoenix hid Jean away and took over her likeness and life and relationship with Scott Summers, then went all dark, killed a bunch of people until she eventually seemingly destroyed herself. The Phoenix returned to the cosmos, and the Avengers found Jean in a cocoon at the bottom of the ocean. She returned to her life, having missed kind of a lot, but the Phoenix remained obsessed with Jean. Since then, she's been cloned, had a daughter from an alternate future, founded X-Factor, got married, did some time traveling, died again, but for real this time, and then was brought back by the Phoenix Force. Let's get into it. On her hero side, Phoenix does 3 thwart, 1 attack and 2 defend. She has psionic and X-Men traits and psionic bond. As a hero, remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force to generate a wild resource once per phase. And on her alter ego side, Jean Grey has a recovery of 3, but when you use that recovery, you're also going to place 1 power counter on Phoenix Force. And as a setup, put Phoenix Force into play restrained side up with 4 power counters on it. So of course a bunch of that is nonsense until we look at the Phoenix Force card, so we're going to move right along. The Phoenix Force, restrained side up, has the permanent keyword and gives Phoenix the restrained trait. After the last power counter is removed from here, flip this card to the Phoenix Force Unleashed. It keeps the permanent keyword and gives Phoenix the Unleashed trait in place of restrained. Phoenix gets -2 thwart and +2 attack. And if ever you place a 4th power counter here, flip it back to the restrained side. So the restrained side is 3 thwart and 1 attack, and the unleashed side is 3 attack and 1 thwart. And managing that, deciding when you're going to flip into destructo mode, is almost this mini game you're playing on the side. And it's way easier to get rid of the power counters than to get them back on. So it's not like you're necessarily going to be flipping back and forth a ton. It's not like Shadowcat's phased card. It's going to be one way most of the time, and then you'll flip, and then you might flip back, and then you might flip again, but it's not going to be a bunch. Digging into her kit, her signature ally is Cyclops in the style of Scott Summers. He's a 3-cost ally with 3 hit points who does 2s in thwart and attack and has the X-Men trait. After he enters play, you may place 2 power counters on Phoenix Force, but you must remove 2 when he leaves play. So that first response is optional. You don't have to take those 2 power counters. There's not a lot of cases where you wouldn't want to take those 2, but if you're unleashed and you want to stay unleashed and you already have maybe 2 or 3 power counters on Phoenix Force and you don't want to flip to restrained, then you might not take them, but you do have to lose them when he leaves play. White Hot Room is a location support that has the Phoenix trait. It costs 2, and as an alter ego action, exhaust it to either place 1 power counter on Phoenix Force or heal 2 damage from Jean Grey. Her recovery isn't great at 3, considering she's bonded with a cosmic entity. You'd think she'd be a little bit more robust than that. So this 2 heal to sort of fluff that 3 up to 5 is really nice. A 2-cost upgrade is next. Phoenix Suit. It has the item trait and it gives Phoenix the aerial trait. If she's restrained, she gains steady, so it'll take 2 cards to stun or confuse her. If she's unleashed, she gains retaliate, so she'll do damage back every time she's attacked. Amazing card. Either form option is great. Aerial is great. She looks great in the card art. It's a win all around. Then we get 1 copy of Rise from the Ashes, a 3-cost upgrade with the Phoenix trait. As an interrupt, when you would be defeated, remove this card from the game, ready your identity, and restore it to its printed hit point value. Remove each power counter from Phoenix Force. Thematically incredible, of course. You die, but then the Phoenix is like, no, you don't. I'm going to bring you back, but I'm also going to take over your body, and it does immediately flip you to the Unleashed side because you're losing all those power counters. But if you're then able to use that as a final push against the villain, then who cares? Telekinetic Shield is next. We get 1 copy of this 2-cost upgrade with a psionic trait that attaches to a friendly character. As a forced interrupt, when the attached character would take any amount of damage, place that damage here, then discard it if there's at least 5 damage on it. Ah, that's so good. Rhino has one of these, Crossbones has one of these. I'm sure there's other bad guys with them that I'm not thinking of, but now you get to have one, and you can do all kinds of fun stuff with that. If it gets to 4 and then you take a big hit, it's going to soak that entire hit because it's when it hits at least 5. So if you can game that, that's cool. Though it is a forced interrupt, so if you are trying to game it and try to get as much mileage out of that as possible, do note that you cannot choose to not put damage there. Another 2-cost upgrade with a psionic trait that we get 1 copy of is Mental Paralysis, which you can only play in hero form. Attached to a non-elite minion, that minion cannot activate. Discard this card if you ever flip to alter ego form. So you're essentially stunning and confusing a minion as long as you stay in hero form, but you're not actually stunning or confusing, so you don't have to worry about stalwart or steady. 1 copy of Mind Control is next. It's a 4-cost upgrade that turns a non-elite minion into an ally. Treat its text box as if it were blank and treat its scheme value as its thwart value. It's too bad that it too cannot be used against an elite minion, but it's still really good. It's dark. It's dark, you're psychically making somebody attack his friends to death, but it does clear a minion and get you an ally for 4 cost. That's pretty good. Then we get 2 copies of Telekinetic Attack, a 3-cost attack event with a psionic trait. As a hero, deal 7 damage to an enemy, or deal 9 damage with overkill if you're unleashed. Pretty good when you're restrained, really good when you're unleashed. 2 copies of a 2-cost event is next, Psychic Blast. It has the psionic trait, and as a hero action, deal 4 damage to the villain. If you're unleashed, deal 4 damage to each minion engaged with you. 2 resources to do 4 damage is basically on par with most aspect cards, so that's not awesome, but if you are unleashed and there is at least a minion with you, then that's amazing. 2 copies of another 2-cost event, Telepathic Trickery, is up next. Psionic and thwart traits, and as a hero action, remove 4 threat from a scheme, and if you're unleashed, you also stun and confuse an enemy. 2 resources for 4 threat is a little bit better than 2 resources for 4 damage, so in restrained, it's a little bit less lame than Psychic Blast, but the stunning and confusing after you've already thwarted for 4 for 2 cost? Rounding out her kit is 2 copies of Phoenix Firebird, a 1-cost event with the Phoenix trait. As a hero action, either remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force and ready Phoenix, or place 2 counters on Phoenix Force. Yeah, readying is always welcome, but at 1 resource and 1 power counter, that seems just about as expensive as it would be on a non-hero specific card. So that seems like it's a weird cost. But paying 1 resource to load 2 power counters, it's boring, but it might be really useful. The bad stuff! Phoenix's obligation is Burning Hunger. When revealed, if you're unleashed, search the encounter deck and discard and set aside area for Dark Phoenix and reveal her and remove Burning Hunger from the game. If you're restrained, remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force. Burning Hunger gains Surge and you discard it. Another X-Men hero, another obligation that doesn't give you an opportunity to flip down to Alter Ego, but at least in this case you don't need to. You don't have to exhaust as an Alter Ego to get rid of it. But if you're unleashed, it's going to bring out a really nasty Nemesis minion, and if you're restrained, it's just going to discard and then come back around again at some point anyway. And looking at that Nemesis minion, Dark Phoenix is a 2 scheme 2 attack minion with 12 hit points. She has Cosmic Entity and Elite traits. She gets Steady, Toughness, and Villainous. When she schemes, she adds threat to her signature side scheme, and when she's revealed, she puts that side scheme into play. Well, there had to be a downside to Unleashed, right? And what a downside it is. She has Steady, so it's going to take an extra stun or confuse card to stun or confuse her, and she comes into play with a tough status, and she has Villainous, so each of her activations is going to get a boost card, but don't worry, she also has 12 hit points! Tips, strategy, I don't know, good luck. She's elite, so mind control and mental paralysis aren't going to do anything for you. Consume the World is the side scheme that Dark Phoenix is going to be putting that threat on. It's permanent. It comes into play with 6 threat on it. It has a forced response after threat is placed here. If there is at least 12 threat, lose the game. And it has the Amplify icon, so every boost is going to get an extra boost icon, but it loses the Amplify if there's no threat on it. You can't get rid of this. Even if you take all of the threat off of it, it stays in play because it's permanent. So not only are you getting an extra villain, you also get an extra main scheme that can lose you the game. Then we get 3 copies of Fiery Rage, a treachery with the peril keyword. When it's revealed, Dark Phoenix activates against you if she's in play. If not, put a threat on Consume the World and this card gains Surge. This is just an insanely punishing Nemesis set all around, and I guess it needs to be. There's literally no other downside to being unleashed other than Dark Phoenix. And even if you're careful and you stay restrained so that when you bump into your obligation it's not going to mess you up, you still have to worry about Shadow of the Past bringing all this crap into play. Onto her aspect cards, Phoenix came with a Justice deck. Up first is a 4-cost ally, Banshee, but not the terrifying one from Darby O'Gill and the Little People. He's just a mutant named Sean. He gets 2 attack, 2 thwart, and 3 hit points, aerial and X-Men traits, and when he thwarts, you can confuse a minion. Really great addition to confuse lock decks, really great addition to alter ego decks where you're spending most of your time in alter ego. You don't have to worry about a minion adding little bits of threat when you're already paying attention to the villains. Lots of threat. Next is the new Marvel girl, Rachel Summers, who is Jean and Scott Summers' child from an alternate future. She has Psionic and X-Men traits. She costs 3, has 3 hit points, does 2 thwart and 1 attack, but when she attacks a minion, remove X threat from the main scheme where X is that minion's scheme value. Well, I haven't done the math on that because of how I don't do math, but that seems pretty good. You're going to do a little bit of damage, you do a little bit of threat management, and there aren't a ton of minions that have a high scheme value, but for the ones that do, Dark Phoenix has 2, that's not bad. Then we get potentially our last training card, Mission Training. It's a 1-cost upgrade with the training trait that attaches to an X-Men ally, max 1 training per ally. That ally gets +1 thwart and +2 hit points, which gets Cyclops, Marvel Girl, and Banshee. All of those get up to 3 thwart now. You're going to be begging for threat just to have something to do with them. 3 copies of a 3-cost event. Psychic Manipulation is next. It's a thwart event with the Psionic trait, and you may only play it if your identity has the Psionic trait. As an interrupt when the villain schemes, this activation removes threat instead of adding it. Another amazing card for never flipping to hero form. Make the villain do the thwarting for you. I love this card. Mutant Peacekeepers is next. This one is a 1-cost thwart event that we get 3 copies of. Play only if you have the X-Men trait. As a hero action, exhaust your hero and any number of X-Men allies, pool their threat, and remove that much threat from among schemes in play. I'm sure it's great in multiplayer, but if you're in a situation where you need this in true solo, you've already lost. 2 copies of Passion for Justice is our Justice resource card, max 2 per deck. When you spend this to play a thwart event, that event removes an additional threat. No surprises there. It's very similar to the Aggression resource card that we saw, and it's fine. It has to be used very specifically, which kind of sucks. And I don't know if it's worth taking over, say, a resource card that can generate 2 resources instead, but it is, again, very good for those heroes who are looking for a specific resource type because it does generate a wild resource. Aurora Monroe as Storm is our first basic card. She has aerial and X-Men traits, does 2 thwart, 2 attack, and has 3 hit points. She costs 5 resources, but reduce that cost by 1 if you're a mutant or X-Men character. When Storm thwarts, move 2 threat from that scheme to another scheme. So of course you have to have 2 schemes in play for that to work. You can't move 2 threat from a scheme to no scheme. But that's great for clearing out a nasty side scheme. Yes, you're only deferring some of that threat to the main scheme or to another scheme, and if it is going on the main scheme, that can get kind of hairy if you're nearing the threat threshold on it, but that's still a great ability. Cerebro is a 1-cost location support that has the X-Men trait and may only be played if you have the mutant trait. As an alter ego action, exhaust Cerebro to search the top 5 cards of your deck for an X-Men ally and add it to your hand. But if you're psionic, you can search your whole deck. Really good for finding an ally or even just getting an extra resource in hand. Obviously it's better if you have the psionic trait and you can dig through your whole deck, and it's going to get even better as the X-Men ally pool grows. You're going to be able to search your deck, find just the right ally for the moment you're in. Amazing. Psychic Rapport is the Cyclops and Phoenix team-up card. Max 1 per deck. As a hero action, ready Cyclops and Phoenix and then either return a Cyclops card from your discard pile to your hand or add 2 power counters to Phoenix Force. Hey, look at that. It's a team-up card that's actually kind of doable in true solo. Because if you use Cerebro to dig through your deck and find Cyclops, you have a much better chance of having them both out at the same time, though it is still much more effective in two-handed or playing with somebody who's Cyclops. Then we get 3 copies of an aggression card, Psychic Assault. It's a 2-cost attack event with a psionic trait, and your identity must also have the psionic trait to play it. Deal 3 damage to an enemy, and confuse that enemy. Aggression is so focused on doing damage and not so much on threat management, so laying down a confuse, which will give you an opportunity to flip down to alter ego pretty safely, is very good. I mean, there's always the trick is to just not let it know you're afraid. Then we get 3 copies of a protection card, Psychic Misdirection. It's a defense event that also has the psionic trait and also requires that your identity does as well. When an enemy attacks you, choose a different enemy. That enemy gets the damage instead of you. That's fun. Now, you do have to have a minion in play for this to work, and in certain scenarios, those may be few and far between, so it might not go all the time, but it is also a defense event in which you have taken no damage, so unflappable, hard to ignore, you know the ones, they're all going to go off. The leadership card is 3 copies of Psychic Kicker, a 0-cost event with the psionic trait and requires you to have it as well. As a hero, ready an ally. That ally gets +2 to the next basic action it does this phase. Well, the leadership training card is already going to give your allies +1 to their attack and thwart. This is going to give, just one time, it's going to give them +2 more. So Cyclops might be thwarting or punching for 5 for you. Her last card is a second team-up card. Soul Sisters is a 1-cost event for Phoenix and Storm, max 1 per deck. As a hero action, ready Phoenix and Storm. Heal 2 damage from each of them. Team-up cards may finally be the thing that wins me over into the multi-handed solo camp. It's not going to be today, not today, but someday maybe. Because this card's great, and I want to use it. Phoenix is pretty cool. I mean, her Unleashed side is objectively better than her Restrained side, especially if you are running Justice like this pre-constructed deck, because you have so many other ways of dealing with threat. But if you hit that obligation and Dark Phoenix comes into play with her 12 hit points and Villainous, I mean, that very well may be game over. It's awesome thematically, but what a terrible game state. Team building exercise is going to be a big deal for her because so many of her cards had the psionic trait, plus there were aspect cards with the psionic trait, not to mention the X-Men trait. And getting that discount means keeping those counters on Phoenix Force until you're ready to make a big push for damage, or until you know that that obligation is safely in your discard pile. I don't actually think there's a bad way to play her. Protection maybe isn't all that great, but aggression and justice are amazing. Either 3 thwart or 3 attack, depending on which way you want to lean. And if you're going full aggression and you lean into that 3 attack before you've boosted it, you can get that up even higher. It's not going to matter if Dark Phoenix comes into play, because you can just knock her out. All right, well, that's going to do it for Phoenix and the first part of the first X-Men wave. Glad that is behind us. 4 heroes at the same time was a lot. Get off my lawn. The Grouchy Nerd